All right, in today's video, we're going to go over the concept of fair housing, and it's just an introductory video because you really only need to know the basics for your real estate licensing exam. However, there are three areas in particular that we need to know. So today's learning objectives are: what are protected classes? What are the prohibited conduct? Meaning, what are the things under the law that we as licensees cannot do? And then what are the exemptions to fair housing? All right, so it all starts with protected classes. Fair housing and protected classes. That's the foundation for all fair housing laws. All right, it's unlawful for any person to be discriminated against in the purchase or leasing of real property based on their membership in a protected class. So what does that mean? Well, it means that every one of us essentially are a member of a protected class in some form or fashion. And you're going to discover that as we go through the individual protected classes. It also means that I cannot discriminate against you simply because you are a member of a protected class. Let me give you an example. Maybe I hate Catholics and I have a property that's for sale, and I find out that you are a member of the Catholic Church and you're otherwise qualified, but I just simply say I'm not going to sell my property to you because you're a Catholic. That would be discrimination because religion is a protected class. Now, the other thing I want you to know, we're not going to get into how do you prove all of this. That's for a different video. I'm only going to give you the rule. That's what you need to know for your real estate licensing exam. All right. What are the 7 federally protected classes? All right. They're on your screen: race, color, religion, national origin, sex, marital status, and disabilities. And we're going to talk about each one and what they are and what they mean. But here's one thing before we get rolling. Understand, the real estate licensing exam loves to ask students about dates. When were these protected classes put into the law? What date? What year? And I'm going to give that to you, and you just simply got to know it for your real estate licensing exam. The first one I want to talk about is race. Now, the protected class of race comes from the Civil Rights Act of 1866. You have to know that. And it refers to a family, tribe, or group of people coming from the same common ancestry. So let me give you an example of discrimination based on race. I refuse to rent my property to African Americans. That would be an example of discrimination based on race. Or I refuse to sell my property to African Americans, those type of things. The second protected class I want to talk about is color. Now, color was added in the 1968 Fair Housing Act, or the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which was part of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. And color refers to the color of an individual person's skin, whether it be black, brown, white, whether it be plaid, purple, it doesn't matter. It's based on the person's skin color. An example of discrimination would be refusing to rent to an applicant because they have brown skin, or refusing to sell to somebody because they have brown skin. The next protected class is religion. Again, this comes from the Fair Housing Act of 1968. There's an error there that's on your screen. It says the Fair Housing Act of 1988. That is incorrect. That's a mistake. It's the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and that means that the protected class of religion was added in 1968, and it refers to all aspects of religious beliefs, observances, and practices. So it's a little bit broader. An example of discrimination would be refusing to rent to a Catholic, a Muslim, a Buddhist, etc. But it also goes to observances and practices. Let me give you an example. There was a case where in an apartment community, there was some, I believe they were Buddhist or Hindu, I don't remember, but they would go out into the common area garden every morning and they would meditate and do their chant. It wasn't really loud. It was just they would go in the flower garden, which is considered common area in the apartment community, and they would do their observance or their practice. Some other tenants had issues with it. They went to the property manager, and the property manager put an end to the practice. That is discriminatory in nature because they were discriminating against that tenant based on their religious practice or observance. So that's an example of discrimination based on religion. The next protected class is national origin, and this comes from the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and it refers to the country in which a person was born or from which the person's ancestors came from. So, an example of discrimination based on national origin is you refuse to rent to an individual because they're Native American. They belong to the Cherokee tribe, or they're from India. All right. So let me also point this out, and I have it on your screen because it's interesting. It says discrimination against a Puerto Rican tenant by an African American property owner. And the reason I put that in there is because there is a myth out there that says someone in a minority group cannot be guilty of discrimination. So property managers would falsely hire, let's say, an African American to be the property manager, and then they would say no Puerto Ricans or no Latinos or those type of things, thinking that they were exempt from the fair housing law because it was the African American property manager that was doing the discrimination. Understand that is not true. That is false. That is not an exemption to the fair housing law. All right, the next protected class is sex, and that was added in 1974. That includes gender, male or female. It also includes gender identity and gender expression. Also includes pregnancy, childbirth, or conditions related to pregnancy or childbirth. So it's very broad in nature. Now, I do want to cover a couple of new items to the protected class of sex, and I have them on your screen there. Gender expression, that's defined as a person's gender-related appearance and behavior, whether or not stereotypically associated with the person's assigned sex at birth. So let me give you an example. A man that's a cross-dresser, a man that dresses in women's clothing, or a woman that dresses in man's clothing. That's gender expression. Another one is gender identity, and that's defined as refers to one's internal personal sense of being a man or a woman. And an example of gender identity is an individual with a birth assigned sex of male, but he views himself as a female. And that would be gender identity. The point is that is all protected under the federal fair housing laws under the protected class of sex. So what does that mean? So Tom comes in and Tom is dressed in a dress. And Tom says, I want to rent your apartment. And you say, sorry, I don't like cross-dressers, so therefore I'm not going to rent to you. That is discrimination under fair housing law. And I know it's simplistic in nature, but this is introductory, and I'm trying to get you introduced to this concept of fair housing. The other thing I want to talk about, I'm not going to spend any time, but the Violence Against Women Act, that is a federal law that falls under this protected class, and it protects the victim of particularly women in domestic violence situations. All right, the next protected class I want to discuss is family status. Now, familial status and disabilities, as we're going to talk about next, was introduced in 1988. And it's part of the Fair Housing Amendment Act of 1988. And it refers to a situation where there are one or more persons under the age of 18 that resides with a parent or a legal guardian, a foster parent, etc., in a rental unit, for example. It also applies in the case of pregnancy or in the process of obtaining legal custody of someone that's under the legal age of majority as well. So there are many aspects of familial status or family status that is protected. And we're going to talk more about that in the prohibitive conduct section. However, one of the things, or a common example of discrimination would be, number one, is you're living in an apartment community and they say no children. or you live in an apartment community and the apartment community finds out that you're pregnant or you're going to be adopting, and then they say, sorry, you got to move. That would be illegal, and it's discriminatory in nature. But it also applies to other things where forcing families with children, for example, to live on a particular floor of an apartment community or living in a particular area of that apartment community. So you're segregating families with children. That also would be protected under fair housing laws and would be illegal as discriminatory in nature. The final seventh protected class is disabilities, or what we call handicaps. This too is very broad in nature. We're going to keep it very simplistic here. It derives from the Fair Housing Amendment Act of 1988. That means in 1988, disabilities or handicaps was added as a protected class. It refers to both physical and mental disabilities, including things like depression, anxiety, etc. And an example of discriminating against someone with a disability is not allowing an individual to have a service animal in their home that they're renting or in their condo regime. I was a part of a case one time or doing some training for a condo regime where they refused to allow a person who was legally entitled to a comfort animal. It said no animals, and this person had like depression or anxiety, and the doctor prescribed a comfort animal. They wanted a dog. The condo regime said no, even though that they knew that it was a comfort animal, and the owner of the condo went through all the proper steps to verify that this was a comfort animal, and they still said no. That's an example of discrimination based on disabilities. Now, we're not going to go into details here, but I will tell you that this is a very, very broad concept within the fair housing community. And certainly as you get into the business, you're going to learn more and more about this protected class. Don't forget also, state and local governments can add on to the 7 federally protected classes. Here is just an example of a few that you might see that's out there. You probably won't need to know these for any type of licensing exam, but I just wanted to point it out. We see age, creed, veterans, citizenships, genetic information, LGBTQ, sexual orientation, those type of things. So again, the state government and local governments like cities and counties can add to the federal protected classes. Now, real quick, guess who's not a protected class? And that is pet owners and smokers, cigarette smokers. And what I mean by pet owners is they are pets. They have not been designated as a service animal or a comfort animal or what we call an emotional support animal. They're just pets. A landlord is legally within their rights to say no dogs, no cats, no pets at all, or brown cats only, or dogs of 20 pounds or less. When it's a pet, a landlord can do whatever they want as far as designating which pets are allowed or not. They can say no smoking, absolutely no smoking. A condominium regime can say that owners cannot smoke cigarettes. That would all be legal. Is it discrimination? Yes, but it is legal discrimination. So I thought I'd point that out. Smokers. Now don't forget, there are other fair housing laws that we did not discuss in this video that you still need to know for your real estate licensing exam. One of them is this video right here, so make sure you take a look at it. And by the way, if you have not subscribed to the channel, please do so. Click the little circle to my left. I'll see you in the next video.